The next session deals with admissions agents, tuitions, and finances. There are lots of issues that can come up here, and I took some notes on some questions that when we get to the programmatic part of the day, after lunch, whether program implications, so many things, not only the academic program, but the resident life program that we can talk about that might actually come up here. For example, is your orientation program part of your admissions department or resident life? And where does the handoff happen? So questions like that we can discuss, and a lot of issues will come up. I just want to make a few comments before Dan comes up and speaks about admissions, agents, tuitions, and finances. First, about admissions. As you get into this, you need to decide what information you need, what information you want. Some of you, by law, are required to get health information, and it doesn't help you very much if it's in Chinese. We have gotten much better at chasing this and actually getting compliance the bigger that we've gotten. So now we have nearly 100% compliance, and it was from being proactive with parents and with agents about what we actually need for someone to be able to participate. And you need to have some kind of stick at the end of it, some kind of accountability. If they don't have it by a certain date, what are the consequences for that family? But again, proactive communication has helped us get there. So first, what information do you want? Probably language information and academic information is the most important to see if you're a good fit. Some things that you might want to be thinking about is how high in the echelon of Chinese students do you need to go to get a good fit for your school? Because students who excel on the Gaokao aren't coming. They're not the ones who are coming. And then the question is, how far down the rest of the ladder are you willing, or can your school afford to go? Now, as we've grown and diversified the number of countries that we serve, we found that this is a real problem. A number of students from very wealthy families who can pay full freight and therefore very attractive to us for a number of reasons, have learning disabilities in their native language. And so to be able to deal with them in a special education, and we do, as a town academy, we have the full range of special education services, but it's in a second language. And so it's more difficult. So what information do you need, do you want? Also, countries like Japan and Korea and China are not very good about mental health information. Psychological testing, for example. And so you won't necessarily get that information right away, but you can ask for it if you value it. The second thing that I want to say is you need to make sure you get accurate information. And we'll talk about agents in a second. But the accurate, we found that we have had whole false transcripts. The student never even took the courses, but we didn't find that out until they were struggling and we didn't know why. And also, did they write their essay? If you have an essay, and if they did write it, under what conditions did they write it? So I know that many of you are starting, if you are starting, you're starting small programs. Very few people in the room have a program as large as ours. I travel to Asia once a year, but every single student that we enroll has a face-to-face interview with somebody. So I suggest that if you can't afford to do that, and there's nothing like a 26-hour plane ride, Skype is a good way to get the same effect and get some kind of read on the students' English skills, even though you lose something in the communication because of the channel, because of the medium. That's one thing that I would suggest. You see in Suzanne's chart about pre-arrival recommendations. Again, proactive communications not only with students but with parents, and especially about departure dates. So you can say to your agent, and we'll talk about that relationship in a second, or to the parents, it's going to sound like this. June 6th is our last day, no matter what. June 6th is our last day. So, and we'll say, we understand that a grandparent might fall ill. We understand that that could happen, and we do want to value family. But an illness is not the same as a death, is not the same as a terminal illness. And so we'll be the judge of what is an acceptable excuse. But know that this is, when you sign on for this period of time. Proactive, upfront, so they get their plane tickets then. So they don't get their plane tickets online without you knowing. You know what their plane tickets are before as they arrive, you know when they're going to depart. And that includes vacations. So to be proactive with parents and students. There's a lot of other things you can say if you are in English only during your school day, to let them know that up front, the expectations, recommendations of things to bring and not to bring, to pack and not to pack. And so if you get this message, this mantra throughout the day from me, it's the way you would treat any student. There's just a different degree of difference with these students that you need to be aware of. But as a school that serves students who can't function at the first grade level, all the way to AP National Scholars, students who are homeless versus students who are from families that are millionaires, every student comes with difference. So you treat them with the same kind of care and proactive counseling that you would for any student, trying to be empathetic, think for them ahead of time. Agents. Universities and the most selective American boarding schools find them unsavory. And they say they don't use them, and that's fine for them. The rest of us, if we said we didn't use agents, we wouldn't have any kids. Now, after 30 some odd years of a boarding school, aggressive recruiting for a boarding school, we now have family networks, and we don't have to rely on agents. And we found through experience that companies, large consulting agencies, we don't use them. We won't use them. Those are the ones that have been the most unsavory and the most dishonest about college applications, about transcripts. We prefer former educators who have gone into the business and one-on-one. They're a very small home shop, but they have a tight network of very well-connected families, but they're not a big agency with billboards to recruit students to go overseas. They have access to families that we wouldn't get. Once we have an access to the family, then that usually spins off if we do a good job. There's now a new move among higher education. Mitch Leventhal from NYU is leading this to develop best practices in the use of agents. So you can Google Mitch Leventhal and that effort, and there's a lot of good information there. When it comes down to it, though, you need a relationship that you can trust. It's all built on trust. If you find you can't trust, just one mistake, like one false transcript, one bad piece of information, one piece of not being forthcoming, and that should end the relationship, because it needs to be, for this to work, a relationship built on trust and a partnership, long-term partnership. And one of the things that will get in the way of a long-term partnership is if the agent or the consulting company charges unreasonable fees. And that could be to you or the family. So they'll take a percentage of your tuition as their fee. They could charge you, or they could just charge the family. When they're charging both you and the family, that's probably a sign that you need to get a different agent. But an unreasonable fee is not sustainable over the long term. And so sometimes you need to pay a certain fee to an agent to get in the market. But then as you show that you show them value and you're bringing them clients because of your customer service, then you can negotiate that price. When you set your tuition, make sure you're competitive. An interesting thing we used to set, when we got into the market, we set a pretty low and attractive tuition. And then we found that we weren't getting a lot of students, especially when Japan was a hot market. And we didn't know why we were getting students. And a friend of ours in Japan said, it's because your price is too low. They think that you're not very good because you're afraid to charge a lot of money. But then you also don't want to charge enough, so much that you're pricing yourself out of the market. One of the things that I know some schools have done that I'm not a fan of at all is because international families usually don't get to visit the school, they'll charge what is the going rate, even though they don't offer a very good program. So they just see what other people have on their websites, charge that day school tuition, and not offer a very high quality program. That's one of the reasons why I'm so excited that this is happening today. Make sure your tuition is sufficient to cover your costs, and we'll talk about the finances there. There's going to be marketing costs, and admissions costs, and staffing costs, and counseling costs, maybe teaching if you need an ESL teacher. So make sure your tuitions will at least cover your costs. Most of you are here because you need an alternative revenue stream besides your day school tuition. So make sure you set it reasonable, but don't be greedy. You know, it's like they say in the market, the bears get some, the bulls get some, and the pigs get slaughtered. If you are out to make too much money, you'll be out of business. People will see other people making more and say, hey, maybe we can make it a little bit more by raising our tuition for these students. I suggest you don't do it. It's up to you and your school culture about whether you charge fees for ESL, for language instruction and support, whether you charge fees for any other service, but again, that's your school culture. If you choose a book, if you do a book fee or an athletics fee or an activity fee, and you're a fee culture, then you can probably add some fees here. It's just that some parents and agents will see that as nickel and diming, or wanting and yenning, or whatever. And then finally, for finances, here are some things you want to think about as expense categories: recruitment, operating expenses, housing expenses. You probably need an upfront investment before you're going to start to make much money. Admissions expenses, support programs I mentioned, like counseling, activities. These kids are yours for the weekend, even if they're in home stays. What will you provide for them? Travel to and from the airport. When do they stop being yours? How much does your host family have to take on? Immigration and StISS. I know that Linda will talk a little bit about that, but you're going to have to staff for that. And then parent support and communication. You might, and you probably do need, if you're going to be competitive, you probably take a look at your website and what information and how interactive that is. This is something that's the elephant in the room. It's unbelievably competitive for students right now, and it's going to get worse. The fact that this room is filled, and we could have filled it again, says that. And as I mentioned before, China's not going to stay the land of milk and honey for us for a long time. And so right now, Senator Patrick Leahy has just sponsored federal legislation. I was going to talk about this later. That would allow American public schools to enroll international students for multiple years, pretty much doing away with the J visa and letting students who are going to American public schools get F1 visas as a student. And so that's now, anybody who's a day school and not a boarding school, you're in direct competition with the American public school system right now, more than just exchange programs. So just the landscape is changing. I won't go on.
Yeah, thank you very much.